So I dropped a little Easter egg in the last video. Did you guys catch it? Guess what? The JC is hurt again. That's okay though. So, to catch you guys up here. So remember how I hurt a ringland on the dyno? And I chalked it up to bad eBay pistons? Well, turns out funny enough, that was not the cause. It had to do with water meth injection and distribution issues. So it happened in number 1 again. So if you pay real close attention to the distribution into our runner here, let's get some good light. See how dirty it still is? And you can just compare it to the others. Quite clean. I mean, they're all pretty clean except for number 1, and then 6 looked a little light too. But that's a big reason why I've still been with this stock crossover intake manifold. Is I'm like, well, if I have the water meth, I want good distribution, because you know a forward facing, that's just gonna suck. It's gonna miss number 1 altogether. So I had a bad failure this time, man. It was the first drift comp of this year. I went back down to my small turbo since my clutch wasn't up to par on the S366 anyways. So I've been back on the Super HX40. She was running amazing, and 4 laps in on the first event this year, she started telling knock-knock jokes. So I learned a very valuable lesson that day. Always run a quart over full, especially if you're front sump. If you're front sump, run a quart and a half over full, and do other oil mods too. The only thing I had was a GTE oil pump. Other than that, my oil system was bone stock. So I spun a rod bearing. I actually have a video that can show you all the damage. So yeah, RIP to this build. I think this was build number 3. It lasted almost 2 years, so props to that. I hadn't had to get into this thing until after the dyno and cracking the ringland. So it lived its entire life at like mid 500 wheel horsepower. It handled a whole season of drifting after the manual swap in 2020, and drag race 2, street, you know, all of it. So this car did not have an easy life, so what can you say? Funny enough, I didn't even realize I cracked the ringland until I had it apart. It had good compression. I compression tested all cylinders and it was good. It didn't smoke like crazy either. So yeah, I just started a new build and wanted to do everything right here. That crank was already turned 10 and 10 and straightened out, because the last time it had spun a rod bearing, whenever you spun a rod bearing, especially on like a straight 6 like this, it'll bend the crank. So went ahead and got a virgin crank from my buddy's engine that had been wrecked, and then I mostly did mods to oiling system. I did the Tomei windage tray, as you saw, AccuSump, thermostatic oil cooler, and pressure gauge. All I had before was an idiot light. Kind of freaking stupid, but I just kind of figured, well, it works for a lot of people, it'll work for me. So the car never really got hot and never really had any head gasket issues. So I replaced the head gasket. I wanted to bump up from 9.2 to 10 compression, so I went to a GE head gasket, the single layer. I didn't really check out the head too much at all. I did end up doing cams though. I did BC 264s and springs, because I had been on stock cams this entire time. So I just wanted to make more efficient power, have a good oiling system, and address some of the shortcomings. But yeah, my kid got to shadow a lot of the assembly, so that was cool. So I reshimmed after the cams, of course, and then another thing I wanted to do was ABS delete. So got the hydraulic, the hydraulic flaring tool, and just went to work on that. It was not fun, but I was tired of how cluttered this engine bay was. I just wanted to clean things up. But yeah, I mean, all in all, everything was working pretty decent prior to it hurting itself. Like, the tune was good. I had it on some light flex fuel as well as the water meth, so I went ahead and got rid of the water meth after having my second ringland failure. Just wanted to pursue things with flex fuel. clean up the engine bay, widen out my power band, and make some more efficient power. So I did have aspirations of going to a GTE intake mani. I even got the adapter for it, but my goodness, COVID hit that thing like a fat kid hitting cake. It was I think I was looking at like $400 or $500 for an upper intake mani if I was lucky enough to find one. So that did not come to fruition, but oh well. I also did a Kevlar timing belt, the fluid damper, so poly motor mounts. So I addressed a lot of things that I didn't like before and just wanted to kind of clean things up. So what I ended up doing was taking a virgin crank from my buddy's engine. His car unfortunately got wrecked, so I was able to buy the engine off of him. It broke the timing gear, so it ended up breaking some valves, but the bottom end was good. So I took that crank, put it in my block after it was cleaned up, of course, and I got the rods resized with new bolts and checked everything out. It was 1.5 thou clearance, which if you talk to some higher horsepower JZ guys, they say it's a little tight with that. My machine shop swears by 1.5 thou, so that's what they ended up doing it on. I also plumbed my valve covers for a good catch can setup. I did not like my catch can setup before. It was a recirc style, and it was putting some oil back into the turbo and intercooler, so we can't have that. So I just did like a bigger lines -10 and your regular vent to atmosphere style, so that went really well. Here's me getting the pilot bearing out because this car was a stick shift car, but with my adapter it uses a pilot bushing. I went ahead and rebuilt the turbo because whenever you have a turbo hook to a metal blender like that, it's gonna be bad. So it's not the ideal way to do things, of just rebuilding a turbo like that after it goes bad and just relying on component balanced things. Obviously you can mark the wheel, if it was assembly balanced you can mark the wheel and have it stay the same, but I was just rebuilding it and rolling on the whole component balancing that most whole sets are, but it's not perfect. You'll see basically how that ended up working out for me. Foreshadowing. But yeah, I just ended up sitting out all of the drift season of 2021 because of this failure, and just so this was over the winter of 2021, and I just wanted to come out swinging in 2022. I had a new engine build with cams finally. Like, I was gonna have a good broad power band and some really efficient power, and then I was just gonna run like E85. I'm on 840cc injectors, so I was probably gonna be maxed around, I don't know, 500, 550, but at the very least it was going to be safe. There's my buddy Clarky helping install the engine. So after this engine build and install, I was greeted by a dragging clutch issue. For some reason the clutch wasn't dragging before. I was using a stock master, so I just started throwing parts at it and trying to get it to disengage properly. So I replaced the throwout bearing, I shimmed the throwout bearing, got a hold of Autosport Engineering. They finally just said, hey, you've got to do the upgrade to the Willwood Master. Once we got the clutch figured out, the problems did not stop there. My turbo went bad 20 miles in. Center section was bad. Turbine shaft was bad. Spun bearings right away, even though I did new bearings. After that, I blew a head gasket about 40 miles in. That was because I went to that single layer head gasket, which was less forgiving, and I didn't check the head for flatness because I didn't have head gasket issues before. So did the head gasket. Keep in mind the whole time this is while I'm breaking in the engine. I'm being super light on it. This is the tune I was running. Freaking less than 10 pounds of boost. I think it saw 5,500 RPM max. So this is how that went.
Sounds fucking nasty. Yay! So I'm in the highest gear possible, so I can be at the lowest RPM, so I can like save my engine as much as possible. It's fucking dying. Yeah, she's fucked, bud. Lovely. Fucking lovely. And then what we're gonna do is fucking kill it so we can just coast the rest of the way. Hopefully make it up into the driveway. Fuck you, car. Fuck you.
Much later.
So this was May of 2022, right when the drift season was starting. I had a ton of high hopes for this year, and it did not go the way I wanted. So I sat out pretty much the whole year, but I went straight to work on the Mustang, and then my buddy said, hey, there's a parts car in California. Let's go and pick it up. He needed the body, but not the engine, so I went ahead and grabbed the engine up. The car rolled off a cliff, but the guy said that it was running until it started rolling, and then it died, so it shouldn't have messed itself up too bad. My plan was to just use the block and crank and redo a non-VVTI engine.
I said bring me a 10-second car, not a 10-minute car. Pop the hood. Pop the hood. 2JZ, no shit.
So after checking things out on this engine I pulled out of this wrecked car, you know, it was covered in red rocks from the cliff and everything, but everything was checking out good. The oil looked great, compression and leak down looked good. So I just said screw it, and I ran the entire stock long block and transferred my manifolds and everything over. I got my turbo professionally rebuilt, new center section, turbine, everything. And I got it all together in a week to make a drift comp. Everything went well. I had to tack the water pump pulley because it was slightly bent. Other than that, she was gravy.
What do you have to
You
say?
guys are too fucking quiet.
What do you have to say?
How you doing, Talon?
Good.
Felt fucking good, bud. You scared?
Okay, but stop it here.
How about just don't hit me. It's straight. Here we go.
So the old Cliff engine handled 2 days straight of that shit. So I went ahead and went through the engine that failed me earlier this year that I was supposed to be running. Oil pressure was fantastic. It was like getting over 100 psi on pulls. So as far as why it looks so starved on oil and why it spun bearings, I have no idea. I had the rods resized with new bolts, clearances checked out, virgin crank. I don't freaking know, man. Number 3 main didn't look very good either, so I'm thinking this crank might have bent, but I mean, a lot of time they bend when they spin a bearing, so it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. But either way, I'm going to do another build and make some power. We can't be living at 6 and 7 PSI anymore, but for now, the car's running. I made a comp, this year, which it was killing me not driving, so can't complain too hard. But yeah. Thanks for watching. Things are still in motion here. Just want to give you guys an update on the old Lexus. And yeah, a lot of these bearings lost their saddle, I guess you'd call it, like the springiness, the side load. It's really concerning. I'm going to have to figure out what happened.